Hey guys, Zack here, and this is my review of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Okay, so this episode kind of starts off the new arc of the series where now the group has officially betrayed the boss and are now kind of running from him as they try to figure out a way to actually figure out his identity. But yeah, and also this episode does indeed confirm that Trish is indeed a stand user because she's shown with her stand, and I'm not gonna spoil that, but that is going to be the next major arc of that. That is eventually going to get covered, and I'm kind of excited for that now because I wound up being right. But in case this episode opens up with the five of them and with the five members of the group and Trish currently sailing in the boat that Bruno brought with him with him from the island, and Trish is currently inside Coco Jumbo. She's just kind of chilling out while she waits for her hand to recover, and Narancia is actually using his Aerosmith to keep track of where everybody is, using Aerosmith's sonar ability, and he eventually concludes that there's nobody actually chasing them, and everybody just kind of wonders what they're going to do now. And Giorno is the first person to speak up, pointing out that they should probably be that they should probably get out of Venice soon, since they know the boss is pursuing them. They should probably get as far away from him as possible. But it's at this point where Bruno reveals that no, they can't actually just run off and try and find a way away from the boss, because the boss is revealed to have his own personal guard that kind of helps enact his will. And they're now the next group of enemies that Team Bucciarati is going to have to fight at some point. But this understandably causes them a great deal of concern. Pointing out that since obviously now they have to deal with more enemies than when they just got finished with dealing with most of the execution squad. So yeah, none of them are feeling particularly good at the moment. Pointing out that they're obviously going to have to figure out a way to fight back. But this moment of revelation is kind of interrupted when Sex Pistols winds up flying out of Misa's pocket and letting him know that they're hungry. So he while he kind of just tries to tell him to keep it down and stop fussing so much, he does eventually point out that everybody else might be hungry as well, and Bruno decides that although it is probably a very bad idea, they decide to get out of the boat and go get some lunch. Where in a very funny thing, Misa and Abbacchio have a bit of a back and forth about what makes a vegetarian, and they have differing ideas about it. Where Misa actually describes what vegetarianism actually is, where you don't eat meat but you still eat the byproducts of meat and use the byproducts of meat, whereas Abbacchio argues the more vegan-esque idea of what being a vegetarian is, where you not only don't eat meat, but you also don't eat any of the byproducts from meat, and that winds up extending to the idea of loafers, which are made out of leather, and a couple other things that are made out of leather. Pointing out that since they're vegetarian, they likely don't use those either. But yeah, that winds up not. Yeah, they have a bit of a back and forth about discussing what that is. When Bruno actually notes that Giorno seems to be standing off by himself, and points out that it's no use getting all worked up, points out that he should sit down and eat, because obviously they're going to be there a while. But and while Giorno doesn't disagree to that, he does also point out that they need to be on their guard to make sure that nobody is to basically just make sure nobody is actually following him. And Giorno kind of concedes, and Bruno kind of concedes to that, but still invites him to sit down. At which point Giorno just kind of starts thinking over everything that he knows is weird with Bucciarati, pointing out that he definitely died, or at least seemingly has, and he doesn't bleed when he gets hurt. So he's noting that something is very, very strange with Bruno, but has no idea what it is for the time being. So he decides to keep those thoughts to himself. Meanwhile, as they're kind of discussing everything, they decide that they actually do need to figure out who the boss's identity might be. And Abbacchio then just suggests that they ask Trish, and he does have a very good valid reason for that. And his intuition is that since obviously the execution squad and the boss both want her dead, she obviously knows something that might be a clue them in onto who the boss's past is. And obviously they do want to ask her because as Bruno explains while they're eating, the boss's stand is invincible to them, and that it doesn't matter who they are, they're not going to be able to fight back. So, and sure enough, he does it. He also proceeds to explain how that knowing the boss's identity is probably the best way to go against him, since obviously they can't fight him in a one-on-one fight. We saw how that worked out, and it's ambiguous as to whether or not Bruno survived, but at least up until this point, because obviously there's a couple of weird things that are happening with Bruno, but he does point out that it is likely the best course of action, but it's at this point where Narancia actually intervenes and points out that he doesn't want to involve Trish in this stuff anymore. As he explains, he knows what kind of person that Trish is very much been betrayed by the boss, and points out that he doesn't really want to involve her in this stuff anymore because he's convinced that she might not know anything, and points out that she likely doesn't want to get involved either, and likely points out that this whole instance doesn't concern her, at which point Trish, having emerged from Coco Jumbo, interjects that that's not exactly true. She actually woke up and noticed what's going on, and points out that she knows for a fact that her father's a bit of a bastard, and she does very much know that the boss kind of is the one responsible for her hand. She kind of pieced that together a little bit, but she does point out that while she does point out that while it is a bit of an issue that the boss wants her dead, she also points out that she very much wants to help the group figure out any sort of information they can to defeat the boss, and points out points out her origin story again, about how her mother was left alone in Sardinia, and she was just kind of raised alone by her single mother, but she told Trish that one day her father would eventually come back, but she also notes that there wasn't any sort of evidence whatsoever about who his identity was when he did come back. There was no photos, no nothing that could actually tie the boss back to anything, and it's at this point where the group realizes what she's trying to say, and that and if they want to know the boss's identity, they're going to have to go to Sardinia. And of course Bruno thanks her for the information, but then wonders why she's even helping them in the first place, pointing out that obviously the boss is her dad, and by extension they're going to eventually have to kill her dad, but she does point out that she doesn't really care about any of that. She just wants to know where she came from. That's literally her only real motivation for actually helping the group, and Bruno kind of solemnly nods to that, and then there's also while they're actually having this conversation, there's actually a really funny scene where this guy, I'm doing this about a word, but there's this guy who just kind of, and I'm bringing this up because it became a meme, but there's this guy who kind of brushes past Narancia and accidentally gets some of his wine on him, and proceeds to complain to Narancia about it, but points out that the point also points out that and kind of argues with Narancia about how he's planning to get all of the stuff out of his suit, but Narancia, misunderstanding his intentions, declares him an enemy, starts beating the shit out of him, then Mista joins in to also beat the shit out of him, and so does Baccio after finishing his wine, and then all three of them all just kind of continue to beat the shit out of him, which is, and it became a meme because this is just this really funny sequence, and again, this is JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. A lot of things in the show are memes, but in any case, Bruno then points out that he's not an enemy, and that they can probably let him go. At which point they start arguing about all the wine in his suit and how it's going to come out. But they also declare that there's likely going to have to be careful with him. But in any case, after that little incident, Narancia does indeed go back to his soup once they just assess that the guy's fine and it likely isn't an enemy, and he also starts mulling over what Trish said about how he thought she was like him, but he realizes that he gave her way too little credit, and quickly realizes that she's a lot tougher than he initially realized, and points out that he still doesn't fully understand why he actually joined the group, but and also pointing out that he did join the group again on a whim, but does point out that he's willing to help her with her situation regardless, but then he notices while stirring his soup that his spoon has actually gone missing, and he proceeds to start looking for it while the group discusses what to do next. But and he isn't able to actually find it, so he goes to get another one from a nearby table. But when he comes back and starts stirring the soup again, he discovers bits and pieces of his old spoon in his soup bowl, which causes Narancia to kind of freak out a little bit because he has no idea what's going on. And then we do find out what is actually going on, and as it turns out, there's actually a shark-based stand that we later find out is named Clash, living inside of Narancia's soup, and after declaring that there's an enemy nearby, this Clash then proceeds to attack Narancia and bites his tongue off. And sure enough, Narancia proceeds to collapse to the floor, and unable to speak, he can only vaguely gesture to where the stand is, but in the meantime, is able to actually fully assess how Clash actually works. Obviously, the rest of the group has no idea what's going on with Narancia because they have no idea that he can speak, and eventually, Bruto does eventually figure out what happened to him, but for the time being, while Narancia is down on the ground, kind of bleeding out through his tongue, he does, and also kind of choking on his tongue because it got bitten off. He does eventually assess how Clash actually works, and that it is a shark-based stand, but its main ability is to teleport between bodies of water. So yeah, it can manifest itself in any body of water, and it can be whatever size it needs to be to accompany that body of water. For example, it was a bit bigger inside of Narancia's soup, but when it transfers to the wine glass near Misa in an effort to try and attack him, it's significantly smaller becomes significantly smaller in the process. And also, it's at this point where Narancia actually tries to warn Misa about the fact that it's trying to attack him, but he starts bleeding out, choking on his tongue, and winds up collapsing. And it's at this point where Misa finally figures out that Narancia is injured. At which point he calls Giorno over and to have him take a look, and sure enough, Giorno accurately assesses that pieces of Misa's tongue is missing, but and that it'll take a couple of minutes for him to actually regrow the parts that he needs, but he also points out that they don't have much time since obviously Narancia is currently bleeding out and choking on his tongue, and it's only a matter of time before he dies and stops breathing. So Giorno asks Misa for a pen, which Misa has, but what Giorno does with it is he actually takes a pen, stabs it into Narancia's neck, and then opens it up and takes all the essential components out, so that it's literally just a breathing tube for Narancia to breathe through until they can replace his tongue. It does work. They're very relieved about Narancia's tongue being able to breathe now, and Giorno then proceeds to use his gold experience to actually heal Narancia and turn his tongue back to normal. Meanwhile, we finally actually meet Squalo as well as his lover Terezio, and what we find out is that the two, and yes, I do mean lovers, it's heavily implied based on how well, I mean, with Sorbet and Gelato earlier in the episode, or earlier in this iteration of the series, it was ambiguous as to whether or not they were a couple. These two aren't exactly subtle about it. They are very heavily implied to be a same-sex relationship, and I'm all for that, especially since I think this is like, I mean, they're bad guys, obviously, they're enemies, but I am kind of happy because I think this is like one of the earlier examples of a same-sex relationship in a manga series, and definitely not an anime. I think we've had plenty of those at this point, but this is definitely one of the earlier iterations of a manga. This is one of the earlier iterations of a manga, because obviously we had the first Yandere back in part 4, but I think this might be the first same-sex relationship in part 5. I'm not 100%, but in case I do kind of like that, like how we have gay representation in JoJo's now. They always kind of blur that line with the designs, but now they've openly addressed it. There's a gay couple in JoJo's. They're enemies, but yeah. But in any case, after assessing what happened with Narancia, they then accurately conclude that the newbie must be that the one person they don't know must be Giorno, since obviously he's the only one they don't know. But they then point out that they obviously underestimated the group a little bit, and sure enough, Squalo underestimated his Clash and its ability to actually attack the group, and points out that he may actually need Terezio's help with this one. And Terezio assesses that yes, he probably does need the help, but he also points out that since Narancia literally just got attacked, he would be the perfect pawn for them. And sure enough, they assess that now that they have an idea of what they need, have a game plan of what they need to do to take out the rest of the group. They point out that that it should go very smoothly, or as Terezio points out, it'll go all according to plan. Which actually is his catchphrase, I should point out. It's something that he brings up several times throughout his arc. But But in case once Narancia is fully recovered, he then starts he's then very thankful for Giorno for patching him up, and starts wondering what exactly is going on. And it's at this point where Misa starts grilling him for information. And initially, Narancia is very helpful. He does point out that he actually saw the enemy in his stoop, but he doesn't fully understand what he saw. But it's at this point where, after Misa tries to ask for further information to actually try and clarify what they're up against, something strange starts happening to Misa, and that, he starts contradicting himself, and he very obviously knows that he's starting to contradict himself, and knows that what he's saying isn't what he actually wants to say. So yeah, it becomes increasingly obvious that something is wrong with Narancia, and several of the members of the group kind of pick up on how Narancia's behavior is strange, but they don't really comment on it or figure it out right away. But in any case, Bruno sends Abaccio to go look for the enemy stands while they try and figure out what Narancia's trying to say, and Narancia does eventually figure out that he's lying without meaning to, and is trying to figure out why he's lying without meaning to. And several of the group members then proceed to assess that Misa might be where Misa actually might be pointing them, and sure enough, what we find out is that Misa is actually pointing them in the very wrong direction. Case in point, Clash appears in the canal at one point, and he points them in the direction of the bathroom, even though he points out that the stand is supposed to be nearby, and also that he can't really decide on whether the stand is slow or fast, or big or small, or any of the other information that would be helpful. And Misa eventually gives up trying to ask him questions. So they eventually do follow Misa into the take Narancia's advice and go into the bathroom to go look for the stand. But it's at this point where he kind of winds up figuring out what it is that the duo are actually doing to him. As we find out, Clash actually winds up teleporting to the tears on Narancia's cheek because he's so upset with the fact that he's lying and trying to figure out why he's not, that he actually starts sobbing in an effort to try and get the group to try and listen to him. But it's at this point where Clash actually appears on his cheek, and through their stands, the Squall and Terezio actually wind up having a bit of a conversation and a bit of a back and forth about what their stands actually do. And sure enough, they explain how they're actually using Narancia to kind of lead the group, to kind of pick off the group one by one by leading them to the water. And the way they're doing that is through Terezio's talking head, which is a small little pink stand that is able to hide in somebody's mouth and forces them to compulsively lie and do things that they don't want to do. So basically that's all the stand. That's basically the only thing the stand needs to do, because it's very effective at its job. But it's not particularly powerful. But that's where Clash comes in. So by using Narancia to actually deceive the rest of the group, they're able to actually lure the group toward water so that Clash can take them out one by one. And that's basically what their duo is. They pick somebody to play the victim, in this case Narancia, because they bit off his tongue. But yeah, they basically use someone as a victim for talking head, who then leads the rest of the group toward being killed by each Clash. And Narancia, upon hearing all of this, but from the two of them going back and forth via their stands, accurately concludes that they are indeed trying to use them to try and kill his teammates, and resolves to actually find a way to actually keep them as far away from the water as possible. First and foremost, they start investigating the sink to try and figure out there's an enemy there, but Narancia immediately closes off the sink so that they can't actually do that. But then they actually find out that Talking Head actually has another ability, and that the tongue it's attached to, it actually acts as an extension of its body, and it can cause it to grow and retract as needed. So basically Narancia gains a prehensile tongue while under the effects of Talking Head. And because he can't really control his tongue, Talking Head then proceeds to use Narancia's tongue to open the faucet again, with Narancia kind of chasing them all away from it before stopping up all the water again. It's at this point where Abaccio starts going to investigate the toilet, and Narancia quickly realizing that the toilet has water in it, he of course immediately goes to the toilet and takes a piss, so that he can basically dissuade Abaccio away from it, and by extension everybody else, even though he's very much telling them, hey, come look at me take a piss. That's basically what the basically what Talking Head winds up doing. Basically Narancia just takes a piss in the toilet, and despite Talking Head's protests to try and get everybody to come look at the toilet and to look at Narancia taking a piss, obviously the rest of the group is very much weirded out by that, and proceed to leave, concluding that there obviously isn't an enemy in here, and all decide to leave. But except for Gio, but Terezio, desperate to try and get the rest of the group to get some of the group to actually come back, proceeds to actually pull out Narancia's knife using his tongue, and slices Narancia's hands with it, which causes Narancia to obviously bleed, which is once again a source of liquid that Clash can use to teleport. And Narancia has since figured this out, and obviously Giorno goes to go investigate, pointing out that he can actually help Narancia figure out what's going on with his hands. And but Narancia, realizing that they're going to use Clash to actually attack him, actually comes up with a pretty clever idea to actually cauterize his hands and make sure and stop the bleeding. So he basically blows up a nearby pipe to actually make it hot enough that Narancia can actually cauterize his hands and close the wounds that way. But throughout this sequence, Giorno has since finally realized that something is very much wrong with Narancia, and has accurately concluded that there's an enemy stand attacking him. Not in the way that would actually hurt somebody, but he does note that the enemy's ability seems to be to make Narancia contradict himself, having picked up on the fact that Narancia has been contradicting himself and saying some stuff that he doesn't want to actually say. So from that, he's actually concluded that Narancia is indeed not in control of his lying, but and sure enough, Giorno goes to investigate, pointing out that he'll need to get closer to actually figure it out. But it's at this point where Narancia is very relieved because Giorno has finally figured out what the enemy stand does. But by this point, he realizes too late that he actually created a source of water by cauterizing his hands. So obviously the pipe that Narancia broke open has water in it, and of course Narancia didn't figure out it was leaking until too late. And sure enough, by the time he actually figures out that there's water on the floor, Clash actually winds up emerging and attacking Giorno, and that's where the episode ends. So yeah, there's a couple of different things to go off of here. First and foremost, this is the arc where obviously this is the arc where Trish is going to have her stand revealed, and it is revealed in the OP, but I'm not going to picture it until it's revealed in an episode yet, mainly because I don't know what its name is yet. But more to the point, this episode kind of showcases that yes, they are going to go and fight the boss, but it's going to be trickier than they thought, because obviously the boss is very powerful, but so are his minions. As his direct group under him his personal guard are very dangerous. Case in point, Terezio and Squalo, who have the ability to both one has the ability to manipulate people into going towards sources of water, and the other has the ability to summon his stand from sources of water. They are a very dangerous combination, and there's apparently an entire group of enemies like them. So that's gonna be interesting and fun. But and also Terezio and Squalo being a gay couple makes me happy. Even if they are enemies, it does make me happy that there's a group of characters like that. But yeah, this episode. But yeah, and also this is gonna be interesting in that how they're actually going to figure out how to find out the boss's identity. So I'm very interested in seeing how that arc is going to play out. But for the time being, I think I'm going to leave this review here. So thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter in the description below. Be sure to check out my Patreon in the description below as well. It's only a couple bucks a month. It does really help me out, and you guys get access to a bunch of cool perks that are my way of saying thanks. So be sure to check those out. Link is down in the description. But in any case, thank you guys so much for watching. Also be sure to go check out the videos linked in the end screen as well. Top video is the most recent one, whereas the bottom video is based on what you've already seen. So if you want to try something new or see more of what you like, then be sure to check both of those videos out. But in any case, thank you guys so much for watching. And until next time, I will see you guys in the next video. Peace!